My brother framed me for theft while I covered all his debts, so I revealed the truth and left him broke, shunned, and shocked everyone. I'm a 27-year-old guy who has always been cast as the responsible one, the steady backbone of a family that somehow revolved entirely around my younger brother's chaos, excuses, and never-ending disasters. While he racked up credit card debt, maxed out loans, and launched doomed business ideas every few months, I quietly stepped in, transferring money, making calls, and smoothing things over because I believed loyalty meant sacrifice and sacrifice meant love. I remember sitting at my kitchen table late at night, the glow of my laptop reflecting off unpaid notices, whispering to myself, "He's family, he'll change," as I wired another chunk of my savings away. The pride I felt was strange and almost poisonous, a warm sense of being the dependable one, the fixer, the man who held everything together when everyone else fell apart. My parents fed that role without even realizing the damage, always patting my brother on the shoulder and saying, "He's just misunderstood, he's got so much potential," while looking at me with the expectation of someone who never deserved praise because stability was simply my job. I'd overhear casual comments like, "You're strong, you can handle more," and I swallowed them like silent commandments. Meanwhile, my brother would laugh, nudge my arm, and joke, "Don't worry, ATM, I'll pay you back when I'm rich," flashing that careless grin that somehow charmed everyone but slowly started making my stomach tighten. I began noticing the way he never said thank you, never asked how I was feeling, only how soon I could send the next payment, and every time I hesitated, he'd smirk and say, "Relax, you're my hero, right?" The air between us felt thick with forced humor and unspoken resentment, and even though something inside me whispered that this wasn't normal, I ignored it, because walking away felt like betrayal. Still, as I watched him scroll through expensive sneakers on his phone while my own account balance bled dry, a quiet fear settled in my chest, and for the first time, I wondered who I was really saving, and who I was becoming. I'm a 27-year-old guy who will never forget the hollow knock that shattered the silence of my apartment like a warning I didn't understand yet. When I opened the door, 2 officers stood there, their faces unreadable, the hallway light casting long shadows behind them that made everything feel heavier, colder. One of them said my name slowly and asked, "We need to speak to you about money stolen from your uncle's business account," and my heart dropped so hard it felt like it slammed into the floor. I laughed at first, a shaky, confused sound, whispering, "You've got the wrong person," because the idea was so absurd it didn't even feel real. Then they told me it was my brother who'd reported me, that he claimed I had access, that I'd borrowed the money under pressure and never planned to return it. My ears rang as if someone had struck me, and all I could say was, "No, he wouldn't do that," but the words felt weak even as they left my mouth. In my head, a storm of thoughts collided, every payment I'd made, every sacrifice, every night I covered for him, while confusion clawed at the edges of my sanity. I imagined his smile, his jokes, his voice calling me his hero, and suddenly it all felt like a cruel performance I never auditioned for. By the time we reached my parents' house, the living room was packed, faces twisted in shock, whispers slicing through the air like quiet knives. My mother clutched her chest and muttered, "How could you do this to your own family?" while my father stared at me with a disappointment that burned deeper than the accusation itself. My brother sat there with his head bowed, pretending to look devastated, and when he finally glanced up, his eyes met mine with something cold and calculating. He sighed softly and said, "I didn't want to believe it either, but the evidence is clear," and in that moment, I felt like the ground beneath me had vanished. I kept repeating, "I didn't do it, I swear," but every word sounded smaller, thinner, swallowed by the weight of their judgment and the echo of his lie. As their stare sharpened and the tension pressed down on my chest, I realized I wasn't just fighting an accusation. I was fighting my own blood, and the quiet certainty in my brother's eyes told me this was only the beginning. I'm a 27-year-old guy who woke up the next morning and realized the world had shifted against me while I slept. My phone was filled with unread messages, not of concern but quiet accusations, distant tones, and awkward silences dressed as politeness. My aunt texted, "We just need some space right now," and my cousin posted vague quotes about betrayal that everyone knew were meant for me. When I stepped outside, the air felt heavier, like even the walls of my own neighborhood knew I was suddenly the villain in a story I didn't write. At home, my parents avoided eye contact, their voices hushed like I was contagious. My mother whispered, "If you're stressed, you should have just told us," as if stress explained stealing thousands of dollars and breaking someone's trust. My father's disappointment dripped from every word when he said, "We raised you better than this," and I felt something deep inside fracture at the injustice of it. My brother stayed quiet, played the wounded victim perfectly, sighing dramatically and muttering, I just don't understand how he could do this, while never once looking me in the eyes. Every room felt colder, every conversation clipped and cautious, and I started noticing how people physically distanced themselves from me, like I was a liability instead of their son, their cousin, their friend. My phone calls went unanswered, my offers to explain shut down with, "Let's not make this worse," and the loneliness began swallowing me whole. Inside, my thoughts spiraled, swinging between rage and disbelief, because I kept replaying every sacrifice I made for my brother like a broken movie reel. Late at night, I sat on my bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the city outside, wondering how loyalty had turned into disgrace so fast. I could still hear my brother's calm voice from the night before, talking about evidence as if he were discussing the weather, not destroying my life. And as I realized no one was truly on my side, that their trust had already shifted away from me, a quiet dread settled in my chest, whispering that this wasn't just misunderstanding, this was deliberate, and I had no idea how far he was willing to go. I'm a 27-year-old guy who never expected betrayal could be so meticulously planned, but that's exactly what I discovered when I started digging through the tiny inconsistencies my brother had left behind. It began with a casual glance at my phone, messages I didn't remember sending, emails I never wrote, files I never downloaded, but someone had made them look like I did. My stomach dropped as the pieces clicked together. He had accessed my accounts, manipulated my digital footprint, and planted evidence that framed me perfectly. Every late-night conversation I'd had with friends, every time I lent him money or covered a payment, had been monitored, twisted, and stored for this exact moment. I felt a mix of rage and disbelief as the realization hit me. This wasn't a snap judgment born of frustration, it was calculated. He had built a trap, and I had walked straight into it, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, all while thinking I was protecting him. I remembered his smirking face when I asked about repayment, the sly jokes, the casual nudges that always seemed innocent. Those little gestures were the breadcrumbs of a betrayal I hadn't seen coming. My parents' expressions started making sense too, the quiet hesitations, the subtle nudges toward trusting him over me, the way they never questioned his stories. My brother had weaponized my loyalty, and I realized I had been complicit in my own destruction by blindly believing in him. My room felt smaller, the walls closing in as panic bubbled under my skin. And yet, amid the shock, a cold clarity began to form. I wasn't powerless, not entirely. I could see the pattern, the deliberate missteps, the calculated charm he used to convince everyone I was guilty. My pulse raced, but a part of me felt alive for the first time in days. I didn't yet know how to fight back, but I knew this: the man I called my brother had just revealed the first layer of his true self, and the next move would have to be mine. The thought lingered in my head as I sat there, staring at the faint glow of my laptop. If this was the game, I would learn to play it, and I wouldn't lose again. I'm a 27-year-old guy who thought I had been blindsided by my brother alone, only to discover that the people I trusted most had been complicit in keeping me in the dark. It started when I overheard a conversation between my parents, hidden behind a slightly ajar door, their voices hushed but unmistakable. "We thought it was best to let him deal with it quietly," my mother said, her tone almost apologetic but laced with guilt. My father added, "He's always been the responsible one, we didn't think he'd ever figure out what's really going on." The realization hit me like a thunderclap. I wasn't just the scapegoat of my brother's schemes, I had been manipulated by everyone I trusted, the very people I'd counted on for support. Their silence had allowed him to construct the perfect trap, all while presenting themselves as impartial bystanders. My stomach twisted, and a bitter taste of betrayal settled in my mouth. Every sacrifice I'd made, every time I'd stepped in to cover his mistakes, suddenly felt like fuel for the very fire that had been set to consume me. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, unable to believe that the people who had raised me, who had guided me, had chosen to protect my brother at my expense. The room felt colder than ever, shadows stretching across the walls like silent witnesses to my isolation. My mind raced with questions I didn't want to ask. How long had they suspected? Why hadn't they stopped him? Could I ever trust them again? And yet, amid the suffocating weight of shock and despair, a spark of clarity ignited. I realized that understanding their complicity also meant I now had a roadmap for exposing the truth. I wasn't entirely powerless. If I moved carefully, I could leverage this knowledge to my advantage. But first, I had to survive the sense of betrayal that felt like it would crush me completely. As I sat there, heart pounding and hands trembling, I couldn't shake the thought that the very foundation of my family had been a lie and the game was far from over. I'm a 27-year-old guy who felt the walls of my life collapsing around me, each day heavier than the last. Sleep became impossible. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every interaction with my brother, my parents, everyone I thought I could trust. Every knock on the door, every message, every glance felt loaded with judgment, suspicion, and subtle accusation. My career started to falter as the stress bled into my work, and I could barely focus on tasks I had once completed effortlessly. At the same time, my brother thrived, walking around like nothing had happened, confident and untouchable. He laughed with friends, shared the family gatherings, and even hinted at future schemes, seemingly oblivious to the chaos he'd caused. I felt invisible and expendable, the foundation I had built my life on crumbling under the weight of lies and manipulation. Every attempt I made to confront him, to demand answers, was met with smirks, vague denials, or excuses that drained the last bits of patience I had. I remember sitting at my kitchen table one night, the faint hum of the fridge filling the silence, staring at stacks of notices and unpaid bills that weren't mine, wondering how I had ended up here. The quiet desperation wrapped around me like a heavy fog, making it hard to breathe, to think, to feel anything other than exhaustion. I couldn't trust my family, my friends were wary, and my own brother had weaponized my loyalty against me. And yet, in the depths of this spiral, a small ember of resolve sparked in my chest. I realized that the more I sank, the clearer my perspective became. I could either be swallowed by this betrayal, or I could find a way to turn it around. But at that moment, sitting in the cold light of my kitchen, I felt utterly trapped, like I was teetering on the edge of a bottomless pit with no handhold. I knew the fall was far from over, and that the true reckoning was only just beginning. I'm a 27-year-old guy who hit a point where nothing felt real anymore, like the ground had been pulled out from under me and I was left dangling over an endless void. I sat in my lawyer's office, surrounded by stacks of papers and figures I could barely process, each number a reminder of the nightmare my brother had orchestrated. Every scenario my lawyer presented was worse than the last: potential criminal charges, ruined reputation, destroyed trust, and the looming possibility that I might lose everything I had worked for. My chest felt tight, my head pounding, and I could barely keep the tears from spilling over. The world outside moved on as if nothing had happened. Cars honked, neighbors laughed in the distance, and the faint smell of rain hit the windowpane, mixing with the sterile scent of paper and printer ink. Inside, I felt completely alone, abandoned, and stripped of my dignity. My parents' subtle complicity, my brother's calm deception, and my own blind loyalty coalesced into a weight I wasn't sure I could survive. Every thought circled back to the same painful question: had I been nothing more than a pawn all along? I remember feeling my body go cold, the room shrinking around me, as I realized that even my own reflection in the polished office window looked like a stranger. I wasn't just at a low point, I was utterly invisible, my identity erased by lies and betrayal. It was a hollow kind of despair, one that left no room for hope, only numbness and a gnawing fear that I might never claw my way back. And yet, somewhere beneath that suffocating weight, a flicker of something stubborn refused to die. I didn't know how or when, but I knew that surrender wasn't an option, not entirely. Something had to give, and the moment that would decide everything was coming, whether I was ready or not. The office clock ticked on, echoing in my ears like a countdown, and I realized the next move would define everything. I'm a 27-year-old guy who finally decided I couldn't sit back and let my life be destroyed any longer. I started combing through every transaction, every message, every tiny detail my brother had touched, and slowly, painfully, the inconsistencies began to appear. Emails were out of order, phone logs had gaps, and bank transfers didn't quite match his story. Each small discovery hit me like a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in the darkness, and I realized that the web he had spun was impressive, but not perfect. I remember the first time I confronted a detail with him, a trembling mix of anger and disbelief in my voice. "This isn't possible, you left traces everywhere. You can't fool everyone." He shrugged, that same smug smirk that had haunted me since the accusation, and muttered, "You're imagining things. Relax." But I wasn't imagining anything, and the clarity made the panic I'd felt slowly turn into determination. Every piece of evidence I found strengthened my resolve, proving that the betrayal, while deep, could be exposed. Even as I pieced together the digital breadcrumbs, the emotional weight of the past weeks pressed down. I felt the sting of every manipulated favor, every time my loyalty had been weaponized against me. My parents' silence, my brother's charm, my own blind trust, they all became fuel, sharpening my focus instead of crushing it. I realized that I now had the power to turn the tables, but only if I moved carefully, deliberately, and without letting anger cloud my judgment. The first glimmers of strategy began to form in my mind, a plan that could unmask him completely. I stayed up all night, the glow of my laptop illuminating stacks of notes and screenshots, imagining the moment the truth would finally break through the lies. The thought kept my pulse racing and my hands trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. I didn't yet know the full consequences, but for the first time in weeks, I felt alive again, and I knew the reckoning was coming. The quiet hum of the city outside pressed against the walls like a promise. The next move was mine, and it would change everything. I'm a 27-year-old guy who realized the only way to reclaim my life was to plan carefully, to strike with precision where my brother thought I was weakest. I began documenting everything: screenshots, emails, messages, even casual comments he had made that revealed his manipulations. Each piece was a thread, and I slowly wove them into a web that would leave no room for doubt or denial. I created folders, timelines, and cross-referenced every lie he had told, every move he had made to frame me. The weight of months of betrayal fueled my focus, turning anger into cold, methodical determination. I could see it forming in my mind like a chessboard. My brother was already overconfident, thinking he had won, assuming his charm and the family's blind faith would protect him. But his arrogance was my advantage. He left gaps, he repeated patterns, and he underestimated my ability to notice. I started testing small traps, asking leading questions, dropping hints to see how he reacted. Each slip, each flinch, added another piece to the puzzle. At the same time, I had to move carefully, keeping my own anxiety in check. The slightest misstep could ruin everything, turn suspicion back on me, and destroy the fragile chance I had to set things right. I spent nights poring over evidence while the city outside hummed quietly, the rain tapping softly against the window as if marking time. Every sound, every detail, became part of my plan, sharpening my awareness and my resolve. By the end of one particularly sleepless night, I leaned back in my chair, hands stiff and face pale, and realized it: the trap was ready. All that remained was to wait for him to fall into it. I didn't know how he would react, or how the family would respond, but one thing was certain: everything was about to change, and there would be no turning back. The quiet anticipation pressed against me like the calm before a storm, and I could feel the reckoning inching closer with every heartbeat. I'm a 27-year-old guy who finally decided that silence had gone on long enough, and it was time to reveal everything. I gathered my evidence and chose the perfect moment, the next family gathering, where everyone would be present, eyes already glued to my brother as if he were the innocent victim. My heart raced as I set up the documents, emails, screenshots, and recordings I had painstakingly collected, each piece a silent hammer waiting to strike. I could feel the tension in the air, the faint hum of the city outside pressing against the walls like a countdown to chaos. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm but edged with steel. "I've been silent long enough," I said, letting the words hang before continuing. "Everything you think you know about me being guilty is a lie. And the person who planned this from the start has been hiding behind charm and lies." Eyes widened. Gasps rippled across the room as I revealed every manipulation, every planted email, every deceptive phone log my brother had orchestrated. The smirk I had memorized for so long faltered and crumbled on his face. My brother tried to interject, stammering weak excuses, but the evidence was undeniable. Screenshots, timestamps, and recordings left no room for doubt, and for the first time in weeks, the room fell silent. My parents' expression shifted from shock to guilt, their earlier complacency replaced by the horror of realization. I felt a strange mix of vindication and sorrow as I looked around. Trust had been broken, but truth had finally cut through the lies. I confronted him directly, voice low but cutting. "You thought you could destroy me, but every lie, every manipulation. I've documented it all. And now, everyone can see the truth." His eyes darted nervously around the room, seeking sympathy, finding none. The weight of his arrogance collapsed into a stillness that felt almost surreal. As I stood there, letting the silence settle like a blanket over the revelation, I realized that this was the moment everything shifted. Power had changed hands, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. But even as relief coursed through me, I knew the aftermath would be complicated, and some wounds would take longer to heal than the satisfaction of victory. I'm a 27-year-old guy who finally felt the crushing weight of betrayal lift, replaced by a quiet, almost surreal sense of liberation. My brother was left stunned, his arrogance shattered, and the financial consequences of his reckless behavior became painfully clear to everyone. I watched him shrink in social circles that had once adored his charm, his lies now exposed, and it was strangely satisfying to see the tables turn so completely. My parents avoided my gaze at first, but over time, the tension softened into reluctant acknowledgement that the truth had always been on my side. I walked through my home, feeling a freedom I hadn't realized I was craving, the apartment smelling faintly of rain from the morning storm, sun breaking through the clouds as if marking a new beginning. The documents, emails, and evidence that had consumed my life for months now felt like armor I could finally set down. I had reclaimed my identity, my dignity, and most importantly, my peace of mind. The betrayal, though still raw in memory, no longer dictated my life or my choices. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding not just my finances, but my confidence and self-respect. My brother's social and financial collapse became a cautionary tale, and while I never gloated, there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that truth had its own way of leveling the playing field. I realized that loyalty and sacrifice are powerful, but when weaponized against you, they require the same vigilance and cunning to protect yourself. Walking outside one evening, feeling the cool air on my face, I understood that the real victory wasn't revenge, it was reclaiming control of my life. I no longer needed validation, sympathy, or approval. My power came from knowing who I was, what I had endured, and that I had survived it all. The past no longer held me hostage. As I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply, the city humming softly around me, I felt an unexpected calm. The storm had passed, and I had emerged not just intact, but stronger, wiser, and finally at peace.